No.
All right, man. We're live, man.
All right, Guard Your Girl Boxing. Long time, man. Since the three of us been together, from the team, Roberto Flack, Rada Da, myself, Coltrane. Um, we decided to switch things up a little different. Bring some other minds into the fold. I was straight on the line with us on the Zoom live, however this thing gonna be presented. We got a good brother who's very knowledgeable, a guy that, again, a relationship we was able to build through social media, and a guy that's doing a lot of great things in the community. And without further ado, he's on the line on the chat with us. That's brother Bishop Kevin Long. Thanks for jumping on with us, Bishop. We greatly appreciate it.
Man, I'm honored. I appreciate the invitation, and I thank you. We solid, and you introduced me to two new brothers, and I'm just excited just to chop it up with you and add whatever I can, but certainly take away a whole lot. So thank you, my brother. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, man. So, obviously this is an odd time for everybody, for obvious reasons what's going on. We have a worldly pandemic that's taking place, not just here where we live at in America, but throughout the globe. And everything's different now. I guess you can say the new norm. Things are starting to kind of shake back up again. The four major sports all started and it's ongoing. And now you have boxing, which is starting to form into its shape. And, we got some big fights coming up. No disrespect to the other cards that took place during the pandemic, but the big boys are starting to come out into the schoolyard now. You got the Charlo twins, you got Lomachenko, you got Danny Garcia, Earl Spence, my man Xavier, who I wish was on, who I'm hoping come on tonight. His rematch with Dylan White. Xavier actually trains Dylan White, and he's a part of his camp. And he has the rematch. They just lost to Alexander Povetkin. That was just signed a couple of days ago. So I wanted to chop it up with him. Hopefully he'll be able to jump up. But anyhow, so you got a lot of things taking place, up and coming. We chomping at the bit. Everybody that's here on this panel, we're junkies. We love this sport. I'm gonna let Brother Bishop he has an interesting story as well. He put some gloves on many moons ago, and not to put your age out there, brother, because like I told you in your post, you fine wine, my good brother here, but once upon a time ago, he did box, and I'll let him share a little bit of that with us, as the opportunity presents itself. But let's just get right into it. But before we do that, there was some news that took place, and I'm gonna bounce this off to you, Roberto, with Canelo Alvarez and his DAZN contract and his contract with Golden Boy, his respective promoter. And some news just came down the pike about lawsuits, that Canelo is filing a grievance and a lawsuit against DAZN and Golden Boy Promotions. And let's table that for a second before we move on to some of these fights that's coming up this month.
You want me to chime?
Yeah, go ahead, jump it off.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been the topic, man. Between the chats and everything, it's big news considering it's the quote unquote bag currently in boxing. When you consider how much money Canelo Alvarez has made, and we've kind of seen things like under the radar, little things that have led us to believe that things maybe ain't like too copacetic, but things continue on. But anytime you see a lawsuit of this magnitude, like, it's clear at this point that there's problems, you know what I'm saying? And I think the question mark I think a lot of us have is really how long is this gonna prolong Canelo from being in the ring? And now really the question mark, based on the argument of who he's fighting, and it's not premier fights, is the radar now really going to be on Canelo, you know, on who he fights, you know, because that's one of the biggest things, I guess, as far as the lawsuit's concerned. But, you know, we're hearing that it got dismissed from the courts in LA, but in most cases, that doesn't mean it's fully over and done with. They're basically telling Canelo, we need some proof that, you know, what you're alleging, you know, can be admissible in court, you know. So we know how this goes, man. Anytime we've seen other fighters in the past, man, that go through court situations and promotional issues. I mean, even in recent years, man, sometimes it leaves these fighters out of the ring longer than they need to be, man. So
no, Bishop. I wanted to get your 2 cents on this situation with Golden Boy and Canelo.
Yeah, man. Well, you know, Robert, I agree. We saw this brewing. We knew there was unrest. You know, I can almost say that the second Golovkin fight was Canelo fighting because he was bound by contract. You could tell the distance that he was keeping from Oscar, and you knew that something was happening. I'll tell you what interests me. 2 things is once this is resolved, because it's definitely irreparable relationship, right? They're not gonna come to terms, and I'm wondering if then he's gonna go to PBC, right? And if he does, you know, for my money, you know, Al Heyman has the most well-oiled in terms of how he fighters, in terms of what his fighters' lives will look like after boxing, that 9 yards. The second thing that interests me is if this thing gets really messy, we might see what we saw with Andre Ward, right? And see that, does Canelo, because I agree again with Robert that like, the radar is on him, but does his value go down as others' value rises? Because like right now, he's like the 168 champion. Ain't no competition.
No.
And even if he's able to fight again, like where does he go? Who's his competition? You know, how far can he go down? How far can he go up? Would it be suicide for him to take a fight at a catch weight with somebody like Usyk? You know what I'm saying? Like, what fight would people want to see if Canelo takes that Andre Ward route and kind of has it out because his legal situation is messy, you know?
No, very well put. And to further that point you made, it's an interesting dynamic when it comes to Canelo, right? Because he achieved so much financially so young. You know, the Mayweather fight, I'm not gonna say it fell in his lap, but it kind of did fall in his lap because Mayweather needed an opponent. You know, he had that 6-fight deal with Showtime. He needed an opponent. Canelo, you know, was up and coming. His name was buzzing. So, and I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but he got a lucrative payment for that fight. So that fight kind of put him into a whole nother stratosphere, another tax bracket, I should say, going forward. With that being said, the Triple G fight later takes place, and they waited Triple G out, and that's just how boxing always been. They waited him out, and those fights set him up even way over the totem pole as far as the pecking order of, you know, the big fish in the pond goes. You know, he was set up so perfectly financially that it's a unique situation where most fighters, where that's in the boat that he's in, they're still seeking paydays that he already kind of had already. And I made a comment like a couple of weeks ago. I said, he's in a situation where he's probably not going to have a big fight going forward. Like, I think a lot of these fights, I'm not saying that he's cashed out, but it's kind of, in a weird way, he kind of has, in a weird way, like where he got these lucrative fights, where he signed his deal with DAZN, and to your point, Bishop, who's there? Like, what they when they signed this gave this man basically like a blank check, and it was a startup company, and we're not going to give a business class 101 here, but everybody knows when you're starting some up, you need a big splash, and Canelo was the big splash, you know, to get people to subscribe. And Roberto and I was talking the other day. Once their allure was over, people stopped subscribing. First of all, why I'm going to pay for something that I can watch for free? Al Heyman fights are on 3-6. Excuse me, I'm speaking Philly speak here. 3-6. You know what I mean? Fox. What is it? CBS. Top Rank. Al Heyman even just did a deal with ESPN. You know, these are fights that we could just watch. We don't have to pay for an ad. But this was a startup ad where they threw all this money at Canelo, and now they're trying to recuperate on their investment. And Canelo, I guess, is seek some type of financial advice outside of the realm. And they probably was like, look, you could, you know, this contract, you need to get out of this. Like, you know, you don't need Golden Boy. You don't need DAZN. Your name and your brand is big enough, to your point. You can sign with Al Heyman, who's technically won't be your promoter. You know, you will just do your business dealings with him, where he will help set up fights with X, Y, and Z, but you don't need to be promotionally tied to anybody. So, but these things never normally end pretty. You know, it's business, not personal, you know, but as far as Golden Boy is concerned, if this thing goes south, like, who's left in their stable?
I think that'd be the end, man.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the biggest question here. What does Golden Boy do at this point?
Yeah, it's wild, man, because I think they know that too, because you remove Canelo from Golden Boy, yo, they only have Ryan Garcia and Virgil Ortiz, but I mean, like, Canelo is an established fighter, you know, and let's keep it 100, man. Like, since the boxing paradigm is dramatically changed in the last look, since Al Heyman has really come to the fold as far as like being at this level, man, and I just don't know what Golden Boy can do. I mean, it's not like they have an influx of fighters. And
Roberto, I want you
to say that with Top Rank, but then again, not really, because, you know, they have fighters like in different divisions, and they have a deal with, like you said, training like ESPN, that even in the streaming world, people still watch ESPN, or they have the
watch
access,
ESPN.
you know?
Right.
The thing that me and Train said from the beginning with DAZN, man, is like we saw all this money, all these checks being written, and I was still thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm tech savvy. Train admits like he's not super tech savvy. ROD, you're pretty good, but most people, like, they just go conventionally to watch boxing on, even at the most was HBO, Showtime, but it was all on cable TV. And, you know, the Fox deal came in while Heyman, so, you know, you still have terrestrial TV playing boxing. I don't know where Canelo is really going to land these big fights or these name fights. Were they throwing out UFC fighters too? Like, really? Is that like where we're going with Canelo? Or does he have, to Train's point, like, does he have like 2 or 3 fights that you look like, wow, man, that's a good fight I'd like to see? Does he go to light heavyweight? You know, does he go to cruiserweight, do like a catchweight fight? I mean, I don't know, man. A lot's going to be told about, you know, about Canelo's future in this next calendar year with whatever happens with this lawsuit.
And unfortunately, the one thing that, you know, you guys know that, like, the business part of boxing bores me, but because we didn't, I mean, honestly, when we look back in the past, you know, we just never had this going on. Like, people just fought. But the one thing that I always say about Canelo, and you know I'm a Canelo fan, as skilled as he is, unfortunately, when we unpack, you know, and peel back the layers of the onion, He has over 50-something fights. He's 30 years old. And I asked, my two brothers over here, Bishop, like, how many more years does he really have? You've been doing this for a long time. How many more years do you really have? So now let's say he got, I think Roberto has said 5 and Train had probably said 3.
Yeah.
But you got to kind of really package some very good, memorable fights in that, like, farewell tour, if you will. Because if you don't, man, like, I hate to say this, your legacy, what is your legacy going to be? Fighting Triple G 3 times? Like, and obviously, when we're boxers, obviously it's always about getting a bag. And I think that he got that with Mayweather, and he's still continuing to get that. But when you think about his career, what will his legacy be based on? At this point in time, the most memorable thing we can say about Canelo Alvarez, unfortunately, is 3 things. A loss against Mayweather, right? That's what he'd be remembered for. A loss against Mayweather, a draw, obviously, and 1-1 or whatever, 1-0-1
Right.
against Triple G. And honestly, a company that found him rags to riches, he's suing. That's really the Canelo story right now. Like,
Right.
there is, a lot of this, and if you think about it, it's a lot of gray areas. There's like nothing defining about this storybook career. He is so skillful for him to just have, 1-0-1, a suit against a company that found you over in Mexico, that brought you over here, and a loss against one of the greatest fighters. Like that. That's your legacy right now at this point.
And to your point, I know you hate to talk about the business rod, but again, his quandary is this: if he does come back, the fights that will be available for him that could potentially be legacy defining are at a higher weight.
Yeah.
With cats who, like, we know he can be touched, right? And 168 ain't gonna do it. And I have to keep, I don't know, I have to keep saying that the most attractive fight would be him at a higher weight with somebody like Usyk. And man, that's a dangerous fight. If they could make that happen. I don't know if they could make it happen at a catch weight, but it is about the bag, and those are the only dangerous fights are the only fights that's going to give him the greatest earning potential.
I mean,
And he's had 50 fights, as you say, over 50 fights. His body is beaten, et cetera, and he got hooked up in a bad business deal that will never, to your point, speak well or completely to his brilliance ability, man.
And I mean, we do have one, like, obviously, like, the one thing dependent upon, and good point, Bishop, dependent upon how the Charlo, how that, the middleweight Charlo, Maul, dependent upon how he shows up next weekend, and him being that free agent, if he slides over to the PBC, like you said, Bishop, and he can kind of get under and work that Al umbrella for a couple, those are kind of be some good options. That would be a good option for him for a one fight situation. But you still got, I mean, Roberto, we got Andrade. He could still fight. I mean, that's not a name, but like Bishop said, it's not a bag. But like the Charlo brings some type of steam to the table. But he's just, the problem with Canelo, he's like Tank. He is so stocky. You know what I mean? That, like, you're right. He could probably make those weights, but then you're talking about someone that's small. Like my pop, he loved the White Kwawi. He was from over the bridge. We loved the Cam the Buzzsaw. We from Philly. We supported our local fighters, but dude was like 5'7". He was fighting at cruiserweight, and he was he was getting it in. But when he started fighting like people that were bigger than him, he had the nerve to go to heavyweight, and he got aired out. And I think that at some point in time, like Sewell always say, there's weight classes for a reason, and obviously you start wondering if he does take that jump, how, number one, proportionately, can his body withstand that weight, and will he lose some of those things that made Canelo great, being at a higher weight class? And number two, if you think about it, does a catch weight really do anything? It's going to be lucrative, like you said, but does a catch weight really do anything and speak to the brilliance of Canelo Alvarez? Like, I think that this is his plateau at this point, middleweight. I think that he shouldn't go any higher. But go ahead. What are you going to say, Roberto?
No, I was gonna say, I mean, there's been the talk of people want, because he fought Kovalev, and however you looked at Kovalev at that point, was the idea of him fighting Beterbiev, who is one of the current light heavyweight champions, and to Bishop's point, man, like, we know Canelo's got good defense. I mean, that I get, but the thing with him, even to this day, is, and however you saw the Kovalev fight, like, there were points in that fight where you kind of questioning, like, Canelo's right there, man, and Kovalev was just pumping a jab, like, just touching him, and I'm like, so I'm thinking, like, all right, well, if you fight a real light heavyweight, that would be a challenge in itself, because it's like Canelo at 168 right now. There's fights, I mean, Benavidez, Plant. The thing with the Callum Smith and the Billy Joe fight, it's like, yeah, I like to see it, but I don't know, man. Like, I think a lot with him is that he's trying to land these big fights. And to ROG's point, and I guess we could segue into, like, the Charlos.
Yeah, perfect segue.
Charlo, like, Jamal, to me, has been one of these guys, man, that he hasn't had that premier fight. He hasn't had that big level fight. Like, he's been wanting to fight Canelo, and we knew that wasn't gonna happen. But it's like he's in a tough fight with Derevyanchenko, and I'm thinking, like, this is an opportunity for him to get a solid win over who I think. I mean, when you look at the middleweight division, man, I mean, he's tit for tat, Derevyanchenko, one of the top guys. I think it opens the door again for that fight to potentially happen, because I have no doubt Jamal will go up to 168. But I guess if you wanted to hop on that, RV, or train as far as
let hold that thought, because that's a perfect segue. I just want to close out with this particular segment of the round table. So basically, I think what we're getting at, because just to take it back to the root of the discussion of him, with these lawsuits and moving on. I know the Bishop brought up Al Heyman. I just wanted to clarify something for the people out there, to the listening audience. When we say Al Heyman, I don't want people to misconstrue or misinterpret what we're saying, because Al Heyman and Premier Boxing Champion, a lot of these fighters, they're not technically under a promotional contract with Al Heyman. Let me see. So I always like to equate it to the music industry, or we'll say the movie industry. You look at Lionsgate films, right? Tyler Perry, Dame Dash did a movie with Lionsgate, countless others, particularly people that was like, doing startup movies, and didn't really have a strong background in the movie industry. Lionsgate opened up a checkbook, said, listen, we'll put our trust in you and your ideas, and we'll give you full control, let you do whatever it is you want to do. We'll get our breakdown off the top or the back end, however that may be. That's how Al Heyman pretty much runs his boxing company. It's new, it's innovative, it's outside the box. The old guard frown upon it and turn their nose up on it, and some fans don't like it. But hey, it seems to be working, and we got some other stuff, Crawford and Smith. We'll get into it on another show. That's a whole nother topic. But the main purpose and the main idea behind this is we're saying that Canelo, technically, because of the level that he's at, he doesn't need to be signed to anyone, really. He's his own train. People say, I'm my brand. He's literally a walking brand at this point. But we'll continue to monitor that situation. And I wanted to segue, because you brought up the Charlo, and obviously that's a big topic of discussion, because they're fighting not this weekend, but the following weekend. Both of them both Charlos are fighting on the card. Now, Roberto, initially, Jamel, who's fighting Edwin Rosario, not Edwin. What's his first name again? Rosario, the junior middleweight.
Oh man.
Is it Jason?
Jason,
Jason
something like that. You hear, hey, ride or die. You hear me talking about Edwin? I'm going back.
Yeah, listen. You know, it's funny. Let me give you my little take on this about Edwin Rosario. He was literally, if I had to really make a boxer that, like, when I was growing up I really feared, but I hated and I feared, it was really him. And the reason why, I never forget, my dad picked me up. My dad used to live in South Philly, and my dad and mom got divorced, and the whole hood would come over our house over the weekend with my dad to watch HBO. And we watched Edwin Rosario. We loved Livingston Bramble. You know, he was just free form. He was a Rasta, all this stuff.
Right.
When I tell you, man, I'll never forget it rained really bad, and I was telling my dad, I was like in second grade, like, hurry up and watch the fight. He got there late. When we got home, I turned on HBO. Bramble was on his back. And I was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it. And my dad was cursing up a storm. I never forget it. So God rest his soul, Edwin Rosario, but like, he really was like Darth Vader in my head. Like, I was like, how did he knock out this crazy boy? All right. So every time when Sui mentions the Edwin Rosario, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, just Bramble. I'll never forget, he had them yellow trunks on. He had yellow and orange trunks, one of those things. I just remember him just being like discombobulated. I'm like, how did this guy clip him? But I respect him after that.
No, listen, not to get off topic, you know, because, you know, we boxing here. As soon as you start bringing names up. But the fight was him and Rosendo Alvarez. That was the fight, them two. You know, we got to do a show, you know, especially, you know, we got the Bishop on the line, on the chat with us. We got to do one of those back, you know, digging in the crates, remember back when type of fights, and go over these fights, man, and really break that joint down. But
look, you see, I'm so I don't start running my mouth, man, because you talking Livingston Brown, El Rosario. Man, that's in my day, Doc.
That's what I said, I know we done struck a nerve with that one. I said, the Bishop probably chomping at the bit, ready to jump. All right, man. So next weekend, we got Rosario versus DAZN Charlo, and big brother Jamal Charlo versus Derevyanchenko on the undercard. Now, interestingly, right, the last time the twins fought on the card, things ain't really go according to plan, right? Big brother fights on the main event. Little, even though they twins, Jamal is technically the oldest twin. So he fights on the undercard. I mean, he fights on the main event. Little brother loses to Tony Harrison, and big brother's flipping out. You could see mentally it was going to be an off night for him. Like, he was just mentally discombobulated. He was just distracted, whatever you want to put out there. And technically, he kind of was getting outboxed in his fight. But that was then. This is now. So much has changed since then. So I don't know, want to jump this off and let's get into this card and how we got here. If you want to set the story as well, set the tape. You want to start it off, ROD?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you have a situation, man, where, you know, Train so eloquently says that triangle theories never work in boxing. You know, we can never say that this guy beat this guy or this guy. So therefore, you know, Y1 plus, you know, X2 must equal this, XY 1 plus 3. You know, there's no algebraic equation to this stuff. And, you know, the reason why I bring that up is because, you know, let's look no further than we pressed the rewind button last January, how we got here with the main event first.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll do that because, you know, everybody was shocked it was the main event. But, you know, near and dear to our hearts, J-Rock, you know, he comes off a fresh victory of Jared Hurd, who we, like, were all shocked that he just bullied Philly style and just manhandled to the point where he didn't even want a rematch. And now he's fighting this guy Rosario. So interestingly enough, Rosario, we were getting calls and Train got him, hey, J-Rock shouldn't sleep on Rosario. Yeah. It's in Philly. Like, he going to be pumped up for the fight. It ain't going to be nothing. Roberto's like, yeah, I don't know about this fight. And I'm like, yeah. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. All right. Like, this is, like, dude got knocked out by Nathaniel. What's my man name? Nathaniel.
Gallimore, yeah, Nathaniel.
Yeah, Gallimore. Yeah, he got knocked out by Nathaniel Gallimore. And, man, J-Rock manhandled Nathaniel Gallimore. Like, this is going to be easy. That second round, I'll never forget when Train texted me. He's like, did you hear that punch? So now all of a sudden, I think Train may be frozen. Train frozen. Anyway, that second round, was his undoing, because after that he lost and we were all shocked. And I think the craziest thing about it was we just looked at it and said, oh crap, like we didn't expect this from this guy. Oh, there you go. You back. We didn't expect this from this guy.
I was checking the score. My bad.
All right. So now, we thought you was Han Solo for a second. We thought you was frozen. But anyway, shout out to Empire Strikes Back. But anyway, what wound up happening was we wound up seeing that, obviously J-Rock gets knocked out. And now, Mel, as Train called it, was kind of losing the fight. And Tony Harrison was admiring his work, saying, yo, looking in the mirror, like, sure enough, I look good. And, he gets clipped. So now we get these two together in the ring, which is kind of crazy, because if we were to actually go by the odds and go by what the picks were, it should have probably been, if you think about it, Harrison and J-Rock in the ring. Mm-hmm. But, we're here now. And obviously, since we're here, this is really like bringing out the story, and the storyline is this. And I'll pass it to Roberto after this. Number one, which Rosario is going to show up? The one against Gallimore or the one against J-Rock? That's number one. And obviously, what Mel is going to show up. So I'll pass it to you, Roberto. That's the storyline, but I'll pass it to you.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you brought up a good point about, at least we'll start with Jamel, man. I mean, he was losing that fight to Tony Harrison, man. And I'll be the first to say that I don't think you could argue like Jamel won that first fight. I was surprised when they gave him the nod, where I thought might have been the opposite with Jamal and Corbin, where I thought like, yeah, Corbin might have won that joint. But I was like, all right, let's see who makes the adjustment in the second fight. But I would argue like that fight, I saw Tony Harrison outboxing Jamel, and then he clipped him, and that was it, So that's what we have to go by, and like they say in boxing, you're only as good as your last performance. But with Jason Rosario, I mean, we were all talking, like me, Train, and ROD, and we're watching the fight unfold, and we were like, whoa. And the thing we noticed, right, ROD, how big Jason Rosario was in relation to like J-Rock, because J-Rock's like a normal size, like junior middleweight, could maybe fight at welter, but we've seen him at junior middleweight, With the thing I didn't realize with Jason Rosario and the Gallimore fight was at middleweight. I was like, oh, I never knew that. Now granted, it's not that much of a disparity, but there is a difference. You're fighting bigger dudes at middleweight. So the thing, man, I don't know, man. The thing, I honestly, like, I could see where Jamel would be the more dynamic dude in this fight. But it's a tricky fight, because I think like based on Jamel's last performance, man, like I think there's things that he can work on. I don't know if Jason Rosario can exploit those type of things from a boxing standpoint.
Very well put.
Try to find Jamel, land something big, and that be it. You know what I'm saying? So it's a tricky fight, man. It's a tricky fight.
You think it'll go to distance, or it's?
I'm gonna say no.
Yeah, somebody's going down. Because you got two heavy hitting guys, right? Yeah.
So for me, I think it doesn't matter. Mario shows up, and I'll tell you why. The reason Tony Harrison gave Mel such a hard time was because he beat him before they got in the ring. He was in his head.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, Mel is a bully, man. I mean, both Charlo brothers are bullies. And generally, when you bully the bully, especially when you bully the bully psychologically before you get in the ring, you already have an advantage.
Mhm.
And so Tony Harrison knew that. We know that he's not as skilled as Charlo is, right? But he beat him psychologically both times.
Mhm.
And because of that, you saw Charlo's anger get the best of him. You saw Charlo because he couldn't bully him and have his way with him, have to try to adjust to that. When he saw that Tony Harrison wasn't just talk, once he found out he got in his head, when he saw that this dude was going to stay in the pocket when he needed to, he was going to move when he had to, and he was able to show up in different ways, that threw him off. But he ain't got that beef with Rosario. And I think what you're going to see in this fight is you're going to see the male Charlo of old. And you're going to see him destroy this cat.
Yeah. And you know what I was talking to Roberto and Rod about, Bishop, was that because we always talk about the triangle theories, how it don't work in boxing, right? That's the one. This is the sport that set the precedent for all the other sport styles make fights, right? So Rosario is a stationary fighter. A stationary fighter fighting against an explosive athletic fighter is kind of a recipe for, I think, for disaster for the stationary guy. Tony Harrison has movement. He has angles, he has turns, subtle as they may be, he moves. He has a jab. He has basic fundamentals that can give problems where Rosario uses a catch and shoot style. He pops that up jab, catches everything, and some of it may be blocked, some of it he may eat, but he don't mind it because he catching and he's shooting everything. Whatever you give him, he gonna return it back. That's fine when you're fighting guys that's not as explosive as you fighting a guy like Jamel. A guy that we saw these guys knocked guy Lubin. You saw what happened with J-Rock where guys are right in the pocket and they threw these athletic, unorthodox uppercuts, and I don't know how Rosario Chin is. Just 2 fights ago, we were writing him off as just a guy, you know what I'm saying? So because he beat J-Rock, and I'm not taking the win away because it was a huge win. I mean, it's a big win if J-Rock was home, it's a big win for the kid. But like Rada Daz said, we've seen him struggle with lesser tier guys. And again, you can't apply the triangle theory, but this is a guy here, I think that, and I hate doing this and I hate saying this, but it's kind of like lightning in the bottle. And Rada Daz, this, I always talk about the levels to the fight game. And I think on Saturday, when you see the two get in the ring, the levels is going to come back out. And I don't know who said it. I think it was Rada Daz that said it, or Roberto. The Charlos realize it's statement time now. Like, if you want these bigger fights, you want to hopefully have a shot at a Canelo and so on and so forth, you got to make a statement on Saturday night. It's time, like you said, Bishop, to go back to putting guys. And I hate doing this because boxing is so much bigger than knockouts, but I do think they both need knockouts. If not knockouts, dominating. But we'll get into Big Brother in a second. But I think that Rosario is telling me, just like I thought Jared Hurd was telling me, or Jamel or Jamalo, because they sit right in the pocket against these guys. And if anybody that's beating them, you can't sit in the pocket. You have to have some type of movement, you know, and if not, you more than likely you probably gonna go to sleep. We saw it happen with Tony Harrison. He got court admiring his work for 5 seconds. You know, boxing that you've been in that ring, Bishop. You know how it is. It's such a small window. You don't have a lot of time to react and think. And that little small period of time when Tony Harrison sat and watched and observed, it was all she wrote for him, you know. But I want to transition into the main event, which was supposed to be, well, actually, that was the main event, the undercard. I'm sorry, the undercard that was supposed to be the
hold
main
on.
event.
Let me before y'all
Go
do
ahead,
that, I'm
Rod.
gonna give my prediction. So
You didn't do it. My bad, Rob.
I agree with y'all both. I agree with all three of you brothers. I mean, you know, Tony Harrison was a Kronk fighter. Is a Kronk fighter, even though the Kronk is around. Is, God bless Emmanuel Stewart.
Yeah.
So those fundamentals you talk about are apparent, you know, when you're a Kronk fighter. And obviously when you're dealing, I remember my dad said, he always used to say, you know what's gonna beat all that crazy stuff? You know, we talk about all that crazy stuff like Mike used to do, bobbing and weaving, all the stuff Floyd used to do, and even that jittery stuff that Shane Mosley used to do. He's like, you know what beats that? I said, what? He said, a freaking jab.
Yeah.
And obviously the way that you have to beat those Charlos out of that stuff, you got to be able to be patient and be able to jab. You know what I mean? You got to set traps. You got to do all that stuff. You ain't going to sit there. You ain't going to air these people out. And obviously what Bishop said is very, very important. You know, you got to be not comparing these guys to Mike Tyson, but you kind of got to be the Buster Douglas where you're like, yo, I ain't really scared of you. Like, I'm bullying you. I'm going to, like, not only, like, belittle you, you know, outside of the ring, but inside the ring, like, I'm winning every clinch. I'm doing that. You got to be willing to do that. And I don't think Rosario, and I dare say this, has the fortitude, if you will, because that Gilmore thing is just still making me scratch my head. Like, yo, what in the world was that? So I'm going with you guys. I think that, you know, younger brother shows up that night, man. And, you know, I think that he's going to try to make his claim to say, listen, this is my division. So, but go ahead, Trent. You're going to translate.
Well, go ahead. I'm gonna leave. Let's just get right into it. Since you're the. Well, we'll start off with you, Bishop. We started with.
Yeah, go ahead. So, Bishop, go ahead. So you got Darius Chico versus older brother. Go ahead, Bishop.
Yeah, this may be a surprise to you, Dylan, but this fight, because styles do make fight, and Deverenchenko, when you were talking about Little Brent and Edwin Rosario, immediately this fight, the Deverenchenko Charlo fight, because Deverenchenko fights coming forward. He has great defense, great footwork, and I think Jamal handle this kind of pressure. It's funny sound. He got dynamite in both hands, and if he hit him, he ain't gonna clip him. If he hit him, it's gonna be solid. It scares me. I just got this feeling. I got the same feeling I had the night, and RD brought it up. I think brought it up. I had the same feeling I had when Wilder walked in second time.
Oh. Wow.
From the time they announced the fight, I had a feeling that the fight was gonna go.
So you going for the upset?
Let me say, I won't be surprised if it happens.
Okay.
Yeah, y'all would have to show me an instance where Maul just handled that kind of and savvy. Again, he hadn't had somebody bully the bully.
Yeah.
And everything go, I'm telling you, I don't know, dude. I don't know.
No,
It's
yeah,
funny.
before we move on, I want to just say something because this is very important, something you brought up. Roberto and Rada, we always talk about this. Fans look at losses way too much. You know, I always talk to you about this, Bishop, how is this mindset out there because a fighter lose, especially when they lose to a really good, great fighter, that they'll bum or this, that, and attributes are attributes, and you just lay them all out. One thing about attributes and habits, they don't go away. They are what they are. And you brought up all the attributes, and I know Rada, he bobbing his head over there because he talks about this all the time, and Roberto as well. We haven't seen any full evidence or proof that can prove the contrary or otherwise. So, but I'm gonna let Roberto, because I know you want to jump right into this. This is really good discussion we have here, and very fair, you know. But Roberto.
I mean, when they announced this fight, man, I was like, wow, okay, because like Train was just saying, man, we've been wanting to see Jamal in a real fight at middleweight for, man, like he's been there since what, 2017, and we know the business side of things as far as you know, Triple G and Canelo, but it's like, you know, we wanted to see him in like Danny Jacobs. That, you know, that never got to happen. Him and you know, Demetrius Andrade, that never got to happen. Billy Joe Saunders, whoever's at middleweight, it's like he's just been dormant, fighting these filler fights, and then he has trouble with this guy Korobov, who's a top 10 guy, but again, we haven't seen him in there with like elite level for the division, not like, you know, pound for pound, but you know, when you talk about top 3 guys that aren't world champion, I mean, I don't see where Derevyanchenko isn't there on anybody's list. But to your point, Train, when you look at losses, right, he has a loss to Danny Jacobs,
Right,
and to Triple G, and that Triple G fight, I'll be the one to tell you, man, that I thought he won that fight.
yeah.
I thought he won, you know, and we know the business, we get it, but going into this fight, man, and Bishop, he made some points, man. It's Derevyanchenko has a pedigree, you know, like he's one of these guys from the same school of like where Lomachenko and Triple G and Koval, all these like those same camps, and all those guys fought in the Olympics and they fought in the Pan Am Games and what have you, and these guys like you regardless of how good they are, like, you know that there's like a pedigree there, you know, some are better than others, but Jamal hasn't fought anybody even remotely close to this level, you know, and also adding Derevyanchenko's fought those guys, you know, he has the experience, you know, that's the funny part when you think about who's got the experience in this fight at middleweight. It's Derevyanchenko. He's fought the higher class middleweights.
Good points, Roberto.
So the whole thing about it is, man, is this is really if people don't think this is the biggest fight of Paul's career, as far as like when you think about forks in the road, man, like this, I mean, not as far as like ending his career, but like where a trajectory could be made. I mean, it would be a win over somebody of that level, man. But he's gonna be in for a fight, man. I want ROD to chime in, but like this is a fight, like same. I'm the same thing, Bishop. I have not told anybody who I think is gonna win this fight to this day. To this day.
Wow. Spoiler.
I know ROD wants to chime in because he was going like Bishop.
Well, it's funny because I think that I share the same. I told you guys.
Yeah,
I felt that number one, this should have been the main event.
Yeah, I agree.
And number two, no disrespect, but number two, I concur like 125,000% with what, you know, Bishop and Roberto said. I mean, you know, I know we can't do the triangle theory, but when we like, you know, I think people make a mistake and look at people's records, as Train said earlier. They'll look at those 13 wins or whatever he has in those like what 2 losses or what have you, whatever that is, and he'll say, or I believe it was 13, right? It was 13 wins he had. It's 13 wins, right? He has 13 fights, or something like that. And they'll look at that and be like, they'll do it just like what happened when Gary Russell fought Lomachenko. And I was like, I'll never forget. My cousin was like, "Oh, Gary Russell gonna dog this guy." I was like, "Do you know about this guy? Like, this is a little like this is like coming to." This is like, that whole time when, like, shout out to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when, like, Uncle Phil went to the pool hall and he was like, he brought out Lucille and, like, basically ran numbers on everybody. Like, he's a loaded gun. And I said that, and we watched Lomo get busy. The only thing with Dermianchenko, I sat there and I watched him beat Triple G behind.
Yes, he did.
And watched him confuse and baffle Triple G to the point where I think Roberto probably got mad at us, but like Sui and I was like, listen, man, Triple G need to retire. Like, he got beat bad.
Yes, he did.
And I'm telling you this right now. They called Dermianchenko the technician. They call him that for a reason. I always say this, man, with these, I go back to what my dad said. These athletic fighters, if you can control your real estate and you have a jab, okay, which this guy has seen, he has a good pedigree, as Roberto says, so he's seen various styles. And the fact that I don't care. I mean, Bishop, you know this from being in the ring and having a cup of coffee with boxing. Like, that basically the power is your last thing to leave as a boxer. So we can talk about how pedestrian Triple G looked, but for him to be able to do that for Triple G and still be in front of him and basically belittle him, it shows me he can take a punch too.
I was just going to say that, right.
And so for me, man, I mean, the only problem he's going to have with him is Charlo is 5'11" and he's athletic. That's the only problem he's going to have. But if he can get past that, honestly, he might make Charlo look very, very, very regular. Very regular.
And that's that's why I referenced the second Wilder Fury fight. You can talk about the padded gloves, et cetera, et cetera. All things aside, Fury made Wilder look really regular that night. And Derevyanchenko, man, he's just such a solid and technical fighter. And I gotta say, I really envision him coming in behind the jab, pressing the fight, closing the distance, and giving Charlo a hard time. Again, I just think both Charlo boys, they're talented, very athletic. But I think, their whole vibe, the thing that gives them an advantage over other fighters is they got a lot of mouth and they're bullies. But cat like Derevyanchenko ain't moved by that.
No, not at all.
The thing I wanted to add too, as far as the Danny Jacobs fight, like we had talked about this in the chat, like, we forget that, the circumstances of why that fight got made. And when you see like they both were trained under Rozier, and I remember the lead up to that fight, like he like did not Derevyanchenko, I mean Rozier, like because he had to side with Danny because that's like his son essentially, and he was like, I hate that this fight has to be made. These guys have trained together. So you have like not to give Derevyanchenko an out or anything, but like you see the drastic difference between his approach and again, styles make fights. But I don't think he's gonna go in next Saturday with this passive attitude that I kind of think he had in that Danny Jacobs fight. And again, when you peel back the reasoning why they had to make it and the backstory, it's like a loss is a loss. But when you look on paper, like the guys that he's lost to, and even one of those being like argumentative, very. I mean, again, this is going to be an uphill battle for Jamal, man. But it's like this is at this point for him, he has to show all he's got at this point, and not say, oh well, you know, when I fight Canelo. Nah, it's gonna be next Saturday.
And it's funny you say that because we seen what I was going to say is we seen clues, unfortunately, man, where you know Maul. I mean, I loved Maul. And we were clues, man, where we saw things where we're like, yo, like, just like with Wilder, we love Wilder, but we saw things and if we like, what the heck, like, you know, if somebody come in here with any type of game plan and like, you know, like Bishop said, and they not afraid of the whole bully mentality, like they gonna wind up busting this behind. So like that last fight that he had, the night that he fought Tony Harrison, the night the little brother fought Tony Harrison. What was his name again?
Corval, Matt Corval.
I remember the second round, man. He was getting hit with some stuff, and I remember him stumbling. I'm like, what was that? And I kind of try to brush it off, but as I started looking, I'm like, dang, like this dude can't deal with it.
It was a simple up and under drill. That's all he was doing. It was an upper under drill. That's all it was. Simple lateral, left, right movement.
And guess what? To that point, we've both seen Durianchenko do the same.
But that's
thing.
Right. And that's to the point is the pedigree. Like these guys, like he comes from a similar schooling where they
that same schooling.
A lot of those European fighters, like they like they're everybody has their styles, but it's very like how they say almost like robotic, where they do something like over and over and over and over, and you see a lot of that with him, man. Like it's not anything fancy like meeting Durianchenko, but it's a lot of it and consistent, like consistently, and he's landing shots. And to Bishop's point, like he's missing, like he's like not getting hit with as much as you would think, though he'll take his chances.
I'm gonna say this though. I'm gonna have fair balance. The only thing I'm gonna say is if Maul goes in there and just straight try to rush him, like just straight out like Wolverine on steroids type stuff, you know what I mean? Like just go crazy berserk. I mean, that would be his only chance. Like he can't afford to get warmed up, like because every time I see you nodding your head. Every time, you know, he gonna sit here and take you 3 rounds to get warmed up like a 86 Buick, you know what I mean, and sitting down, you know, you try to get warmed up, you pumping the gas, you trying to, you know, get this car warmed up. If he do that, you know, Durianchenko is getting warmer and warmer. Now he getting comfortable, and now he controlling this thing. So I think his best recourse would just basically be to just go out there and just rush him. And he would have to just see how Durianchenko would behave, because if you let him sit there and let him get his rhythm, he is going to control that fight. That was the problem Triple G had. He let him get too much rhythm. Yeah, exactly. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm shutting him now. Go ahead.
No,
that was I mean, that was the whole thing. It's just he's I think the other thing too you have to look at is like he may try to catch Durianchenko coming in, depending if he's gonna rush Jamal and try and uppercuts. Yeah. But again, man, like there's you have to think he's gonna be ready for that too. So we'll see, man. I mean, he may have to. The thing with Jamal is this fight, I think, is going to show like how much tools he has in the shed if he needs to make some type of adjustments, man. Because I have a feeling of how Durianchenko is gonna come in, but
speaking of adjustments, if you go back and watch the Durianchenko-Jacobs fight versus the Durianchenko Triple G fight,
right.
You underestimate, you know, you have to notice that Durianchenko has the ability to adjust as well. I mean, he ain't Bud Crawford, but he adjusts so well to both styles. And you could argue that because he sparred with Danny Jacobs, then he was able to adjust because he knew him. But he did what he had to do to get Triple G off his square, man. You know, again, Triple G ain't used to somebody staying in the pocket, tasting his power, not budging. And so he made the adjustments that he had to make to get the advantages that he needed to get. I hear what RD is saying, and I agree with you. That's his best chance. But for me, I don't know that that's gonna be wise. Because if he comes out like Wolverine, then you know that Derenchenko is so composed that he gonna catch him with something and catch him with something real hard, man. And we hadn't seen Maul with this type of competition, with this type of savvy or IQ across the ring from him.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not predicting a Derenchenko win. I'm just saying I ain't gonna be surprised.
I think
we have the same attitude for this fight.
I think we all, to your point, Bishop, I think that we all we're setting the table with different cutlery. You know, we all setting the table to eat, you know, but you know, our cutlery may be different, but we all it's the same set of utensils basically that we're going to eat with. And I agree with everything y'all saying. The one thing I think that may go in Jamal's favor in this fight, it's almost like, I don't know, I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying, because I'm getting ready to go somewhere, and I know people be like, oh, what are you talking about? Because we live in a day and era, if you ever bring up somebody from the past, it's blasphemy. You know, you can't even make a point. But I think about Pacquiao, right, when he fought Marquez. You know, and obviously, I thought Marquez pretty much won every fight that they ever fought in. But at the same time, Pacquiao was just so overwhelming athletically. He always found space, this little bit of space to impose his athleticism. And I do think that both of them, both twins, because they so athletically skilled, and I don't mean that as a backhand compliment, because sometimes when you use the word athletic, you're saying that these people they're not skilled, you know, they're not talented, but they do possess, you know, they're unmatched in certain spots. And those little openings that's presented to Jamal, you know, he got to take advantage of, you know, anticipating timing, because rather if it's luck or they got timing down to a science to get these unorthodox shots off, you know, I do question if Derenchenko can withstand, you know, an uppercut or a straight right hand, or you know, or a shot. They're not big body punches, the Charlo twins. They're more upstairs shots. But you know, you do got to factor that in when you break these fights down. But outside of that, the skill, the science, you know, always is problematic over woulda, coulda, shoulda. You know, but you know, that's pretty much it. We're gonna go ready to wrap up here. You know, we'll reconvene. You know, hopefully we can do this maybe like once a week. This is great, you know, great dialogue. And I don't know what everybody's schedule like. Maybe we can do something right after the fight. That would always be good to get emotions, to talk about the fights. We'll look more into that. Bishop, my brother, appreciate you coming on.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
You know, we're gonna try to do this a lot more often. ROD, Roberto, my brothers, you know, I'll be talking to y'all shortly, as same as you, brother Bishop. And everybody have a good night. And I saw my man Roberto, he pulled that thing off in overtime.
Man. What? Saying, man. ROD, diggity.
It's something magical with this Miami team, man. I don't know, man.
Telling y'all. Trust in Pat Riley.
But anyway, man, let's do this thing again. All right, y'all?
Yes, sir, man.
All right, peace.
Peace.
All right.